and decrease in food quality, people are starting to make the connection and say, well, wait a minute, we got to take this back to the basics or take this forward to the basics. And the basics is the farmer. So that's what my assessment has been, and listening to people speak with pride of going to the farmer's market. People feel good that they went to the farmer's market to get their food. That's because it's a good thing. It's a great thing, and it's necessary.
And it seems like we're starting to get more respect for what we used to do in the past. I mean, I've had this conversation with a couple of folks, and we were remembering I actually grew up in a rural town. You know, I'm born here in Durham. I was raised in terms of my teen years before going off to college in a town called Warrenton, which is in Warren County. And I remember going literally, even though I lived in the city limits, and to some degree it was, I guess, an advantage because I had an extra maybe week or two of education. But I remember a lot of kids that were there at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, but at that time a lot of kids would actually, that first week of school, might even be the first 2 weeks of school, they were pretty much excused to not be in school that first week or two because they were out priming the tobacco or picking corn or doing various other things, picking tomatoes, picking cucumbers, and doing various other things within the farm industry. And even though I wasn't there, I do remember going to my grandmother's house and literally having to, you know, it can be a tedious process, but I still remember it with fond recollections of having to get that little basket of some sort and literally get those split peas and having to drop those split peas in there, you know, 2, 3 at a time. It might take forever to fill that thing up. At least it felt like forever. But at the same time, you were sitting there with, you know, like we guys and women there, and you were sitting there with them having that family time. Because, I mean, you were sitting there having conversations. So a lot of times you were the kid in the room, so have the conversation probably going over your head, but you were still in there with them, and you were, you know, discussing family matters, discussing what's going on in the world. You know, if you were into crazy things like, you know, at that time wrestling was popular. I guess it still is to some degree, but definitely it was a group of folks who were all into the, you know, the worldwide wrestling thing. So you'd hear folks talking about that and talking about whatever else was on TV. So it was very much of a communal environment that was created there, in the sense of you were hanging out with these folks and having these conversations over what was a very basic, lack of a better word, chore. But you were sitting there enjoying it while you were having these conversations. So I think that people are starting to pick up on that and having recollections of those days and trying to come back to those days even in this modern century. At least that's the kind of vibe that I'm getting from people as they're remembering some of those things. Because even folks like up north, they're remembering coming down to their grandparents' house, their great aunt's house or whatever, and being thrown into the field. Because, I mean, just because you were coming up from New York and New Jersey or Philadelphia didn't mean you weren't going to have to do some work when you got down there to the South in that environment and everything.
True. So
I'm sure that there are a lot of people that relate to that. The question I have for Dean real quickly is, Dean, is there a vegan restaurant in the New Jersey part that you're in?
You know what? I'm about to Google that right now, because being as though I do not live that lifestyle, I could not honestly answer that question. But let me check and find out.
But if there's not one, I'm sure that y'all will be glad to bring you one.
I tell you this. Let me make this point that most of our customers are not vegan.
Okay.
Most of our customers are folks who want to eat better and take the opportunity to do so with us, because they have found dishes that they really enjoy. But they are not yet at the point where they're feeling the need to make the change, or they're in process. And like I said earlier, respect the process. If you're at a point where you really just want to appreciate good tasting food, great tasting food, and you know that it's better for you, then that's fine.
Right.
Come on through. And then at the point where you learn more and you want to do more, then we can have that conversation.
Now, one of the conversations that I've had people ask me and everything, and I'm wondering if you have an answer while Dean's looking that up and everything, is what is the difference, for those that don't know the difference, between vegans and vegetarians? I mean, we got people that claim to be vegans, we got folks that claim to be vegetarians, and I'm sure there are different other classifications in between. But for those that are real new to the game, and they're trying to figure out the difference between, say, a vegan and a vegetarian. What is that difference?
Things will be labeled vegetarian, but they will still have dairy or eggs in them. You're not actually eating an animal, but you're eating animal things that have come from the animal. So I'll be vegetarian, but I'll still drink milk. I'll be vegetarian, but I'll still eat eggs. Vegan, you're not consuming anything that came from the animal. And again, vegan, you're not wearing anything that came from the animal. And vegan, you're not going to the zoo to see the animals in cages. So that's the difference. And, it's interesting because a lot of people don't necessarily recognize, if I say I'm vegan, they'll say, okay, well, we have vegetarian options. And they're not catching that there is enough of a difference that it's necessary to have vegan options.
And what do you say to those folks? Because I've also heard this conversation, and like I said, some of this is new, some of it is not. But for those that are listening, I want them to understand too. You also hear people that are claim to be not so much vegan, but sometimes I guess vegan too, but definitely vegetarian. But they say it's perfectly fine for them to go and eat a fish. Now, to me, it seems to me that a fish is an animal as well. So I'm trying to figure out how they are able to explain that they can have a they can't eat chicken, they can't eat turkey, they can't eat beef, but they're perfectly fine going out and getting Mr. Carp.
Well, I guess there's a stigma attached to fish to their benefit. Maybe it's not necessarily appropriate to say because they're not benefiting, they're being killed so that they can be consumed. But, you have fish coming out of the water, which is supposed to be fresh and healthy water. Everybody needs water. Everybody drinks water. So the fish are in the water. They have the fish oils that are good for us, good for our cholesterol, good for heart functioning, good for our skin because of these oils. Seems like there shouldn't be an issue with fish. When I talk to people about fish, it's like, well, think about the fact that the waters are polluted. Just like you mentioned, when they cut open some of these fish and they find all of the plastic straws and plastic bags, they're also getting especially if they're farm raised, like, I beg of anyone, if they're still consuming fish, when we talk about eating better, my thing is eat wild caught, don't go farm raised. Because the farm raised is getting the genetically modified feed, and just in the oceans in general, they're getting all of the prescription drugs that have been flushed down the toilet. And that's part of why people are becoming immune to certain medications and antibiotics because they're already getting it in the foods they're consuming or the fish they're consuming. So it's making that antibiotic or other pharmaceutical less effective in our bodies because we're getting it based on the food that we're eating. And with respect to fish, they're getting it from everything that's in the water. So it's a misnomer to believe that you can just eat fish from anywhere and you'll be all right. When I was a vegan, I'm going to call it downgrading to pescatarian, which was eating dairy and fish. My first marriage was with someone who wasn't a vegan. So that was me sort of leveling out the playing field. I allowed myself to eat fish. I was in Jamaica, and I said, okay, well, this fish is great. I can eat this. This water is much better than the water back home. And then, with the eggs, I was like, okay, well, I'll eat stuff. I will make eggs, but I'll eat something with egg ingredients if they're organic or if they come from free-range eggs. So there's always a better way of doing what you're doing. But I have my reasons for why I can't comfortably, sincerely do it anymore. Until you get to that point, that's how you're going to do it. So if you eat fish, that's great if you're making great decisions on where you're eating your fish from.
And you actually brought up another interesting point that I hadn't thought about as well, but it raises an interesting question about one of our industries that exists here. And I've actually had this conversation about something else that's actually talking about that person, that I agree, we can only do so much about him, but, you know, he claimed he was having a war on opiates because, and that being the current president and everything, but a lot of times we don't think about the fact that our medicines, and I'm sure that you've had issues where being vegan, your health is probably much better than most of us and everything, but every once in a while you probably get a cold and get these other common things that happen and everything. And I was wondering how you deal with medicine, because a lot of times, so if I'm understanding correctly, our medicine has food byproducts in it as well. So as a vegan, how do you deal with that, knowing that some of, say, the cold medicine might have certain products in it that are made of meat products, or definitely products from animals? So, I mean, so we get our medicine from the study of animals. So I was just wondering, as a vegan, how you deal with the fact that sometimes you might have to become medicated.
Well, excellent question. I feel like I have an advantage because I worked in the natural foods industry for over 2 decades. So I was every day around alternative means of addressing health and wellness. So I went the herbal route many times, and I absolutely have felt the difference and felt the impact of adding certain things to my nutritional intake practices. There are certain things that I always have to have. I have to have silver, colloidal silver. I have to have olive leaf extract. I have to have oregano oil. I used to get sinus infections a couple of times a year, even based on how I ate. But again, in keeping my immune system intact, you still got to factor in whether you're getting enough rest. You still got to factor in whether you're eating well enough to have your regular bowel movement to get the toxins out of your body. You still have to deal with, as a vegan, you still have to deal with the same things that anybody else is prone to if you're not taking care of yourself. So what I noticed was when I took the oregano oil, when I dropped my sugar intake, I went from a couple of sinus infections a year to, over the past 3 years in particular, no sinus infection. And that was based on how I was eating as well as how I supplemented myself herbally so that I did not have to take medicine. And the more I learned about pharmaceuticals, the more I was committed to finding alternative means of healing myself at the point where I was dealing with something. So there's no way that I can do a pharmaceutical. There's just no way I can do it knowing everything that goes into that process, everything that goes into that industry, and how that industry has a lock on our government so that the government will do nothing but support it, even though they recognize that it is not serving us except for addressing that immediate removal of the discomfort or sensation, no matter what it's adding to it. I mean, we've all talked about and joked about how you have the side effects that will include death or the same symptom that you're looking to prevent by taking the pharmaceutical. So there's no way for me to not look at nature and the things that I can get from nature as a means of healing and addressing my physical circumstance as opposed to going to a pharmaceutical, even if that's an over-the-counter, and especially if that's an over-the-counter cough medicine, because there are too many other things I know that can assist: the wild cherry bark, the mullein, the lobelia, the things that will, help to break up that mucus and move it out so you don't have the need to cough it up anymore, or the things that will help bring it up. So, again, I have something of an advantage being forced to have this information because I've been around this information, and that's another reason why I tell people, respect the process. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn to do better and be better. But when you are motivated and when you are in an environment, when you're around people who are willing and able and joyfully and willingly sharing that information with you, it makes the process easier. But if you're around the same folks who are locked into their addictions and their no disrespect when I say ignorant, then if that's who you're around, if you're not even trying to put yourself in an environment with other folks who are looking to find different ways